2 years into the lifespan of the 3DS, and every Pokemon fan was chomping at the bit for the main series to finally leap into 3D for the first time. The result was Pokemon X and Y, and since there's no definitive version, today I'll be looking at Pokemon Y, noting version differences as they appear. As a quick reminder, this is the 6th video in an ongoing series of videos analyzing the Pokemon series. If the concept has been explored before, it will not come up again unless something about it has changed. Right off the bat, the game's complete jump into the third dimension is made apparent, with a flashy intro showing off what the new hardware is capable of. These are the first handheld Pokemon games to be fully 3D in both overworld and in battles. And as you'd expect, they're the best looking entries we've seen so far. This is also the first game where you can choose your skin tone at the start of your adventure. Like player gender, this is only cosmetic, but is obviously a very welcome addition. Right as you step out the door of your house and into the Kalos region, you're introduced to the neighbors, Shauna and, depending on gender, Calum or Serena, who invite you to the next town to get a Pokemon. Once you get control, you'll probably notice two major things. First, diagonal movement is finally possible for the first time in the series, and you get the running shoes right away, both incredibly convenient and much needed changes. Second, you'll probably notice that the frame rate is still 30 FPS, but unfortunately the 3D nature of the overworld and battles mean everything this time around, and seemingly in all games going forward will be 30 FPS instead of 60. Frame rate definitely isn't everything, especially in an RPG, and being Game Freak's first shot at a full 3D game, it's understandable enough. The frame rate does, however, affect the game's pacing as it did with every prior entry that was stuck at 30 FPS. While I'm wandering aimlessly, now's a good time to mention that this is the largest regional Pokédex in the series to this date at a whopping 450 Pokémon. Unfortunately, likely due to the newness of 3D modeling to the development team and something else we'll tackle later on, this is also the smallest batch of new Pokémon yet, coming in at only 72. The total number ensures you'll be seeing a variety of Pokemon throughout your playthrough, which is great, but since less than a quarter of them are new, a veteran player is likely going to see a lot more familiar faces than new surprises. After a quick jaunt through the most pointless route in the series, we're in the next town and are called over to meet the Friend Squad. Oh, the Friend Squad. I could see a young kid liking this group, but anyone above the age of 8 is probably going to hate these people. First off, unlike any previous rival in the series, it's more difficult to imagine the protagonist easily befriending these dunderheads. Most of the time, the player character is explicitly connected to their rival as a childhood friend, and in the two exceptions to this, the rival is either not meant to be your friend, like with Silver, or is of a comparable younger age to the rival, like with May and Brendan. In this case, the protagonist is meant to be around 16 years old and just moved to a new town. Not exactly the demographic I could easily imagine making new friends this quickly, especially since they almost instantly insist on giving you a nickname. Fortunately, you can set this to be anything you want, so at least I have one bright spot to look forward to in future interaction with these guys. Secondly, splitting the rivals between 4 characters is a good idea in theory for the sake of variety, but we'll see later on how this plays out. It's here we pick up our starter, and this time around our options are Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie. Honestly, none of these are bad picks. They all end up with typings and designs befitting the RPG archetypes they're meant to represent. With Chespin becoming a grass-fighting warrior, Fennekin becoming a fire psychic mage, and Froakie becoming a water dark ninja. All of them have solid stats as well, and it's hard to go wrong with any of them. I'll be using Froakie since it's my favorite of the bunch. After picking a starter, we could try to leave town but are forced to go back to deliver a letter to our mother and are thrust into our first battle with Shauna, who picked the starter weak to yours. Unlike previous first fights in the series, this time you start out with a move of your Pokemon's type, teaching new players about the type system right away and making a fight that traditionally has been irritatingly random into a much more reasonable encounter for veterans and newcomers alike. After delivering the letter, we're free to go on to the next route and get shown the usual mandatory catching tutorial, even if you catch a Pokemon beforehand. Speaking of, catching Pokemon has seen a slight change that improves the experience immensely. You receive the same amount of experience for catching a Pokemon as you would for defeating it. Naturally, this incentivizes people who typically wouldn't bother to catch Pokemon they weren't interested in to catch more Pokemon as they go along their journey. A big win for a series with the tagline "Gotta catch 'em all." After a walk through the grass, we reach the first dungeon, which should look very familiar to those who have played the Kanto games. Santalune Forest is identical in layout to Viridian Forest, and this is far from the last reference to Kanto we'll see in X and Y. It's about as challenging as Viridian Forest itself was back in Red and Blue. Easier even, since there are more wild Pokemon available at this point than ever before, and there's no obstacle comparable to the level 9 Weedle in the original games. Your friends meet up with you at various points in the forest, and I appreciate the effort to make the group feel more connected here, and in a moment that will become rare as we progress, we're only stopped twice during the trek through the forest. At the end, the friend squad meets up again and the game attempts to recreate Black and White 1's first steps moment, which falls flat on its face if you just stop after taking a step forward. Once you're outside, the group disperses for the time being and you're free to explore the brief Route 3 before arriving in Santalune City. You know the drill by now: Pokemon Center with irritating tutorial, trainer school, first gym. There's also another Kanto throwback with Route 22 to the east, which leads to Victory Road and is inaccessible, but has a few more trainers to battle on the way there. Before tackling the gym though, this is also the first clothing store in the series, and with it we're introduced to trainer customization. A long requested feature that lets you buy items to dress up your trainer in any way you want. As with Ginger, it's a cosmetic only thing, but I'm very glad it's become a staple of the series from here on out. Before we can tackle the first gym, we have to challenge this roller skating girl to an easy fight and get rewarded with a pair of roller skates of our own. This is another incredibly welcome addition, allowing for faster movement than running without even having to press B or open up another menu. The first gym this time around is a Bug-type gym, an appropriate choice for a type that tends to appear towards the start of the game with relatively low stats. The puzzle involves navigating a giant spider web with dewdrops leading you down the obviously correct path, though you're still free to navigate and get into as many trainer battles as you'd like. The leader is Viola, and she's really no trouble for any of the three starters. Fennekin has the advantage against her ace, Vivian. Froakie is resilient enough to deal with both the weak Surskit and Vivian, and Chespin has the advantage against her Surskit but isn't really hampered by Vivian since its only bug-type move is the very weak Infestation. You'll have the bug badge in no time, and man, that's a very high trade level allowance this early in the game. When we leave town, Alexa stops us and gives us the EXP share, which has undergone a major change. Instead of being a held item, the EXP share is now a key item that is turned on by default and gives all your Pokemon experience for battling. This sounds great on paper. No more messing around with held items and everything in your party grows at an even rate. The problem lies with the way the EXP system has been changed. The way EXP gain is calculated has reverted back to pre-Generation 5 rates, meaning every Pokemon will get the same amount of experience instead of lower level Pokemon getting more for beating tougher foes and higher level Pokemon getting less for picking off weak foes. Experience is no longer divided either. If a Pokemon appears in battle, they get the full amount of experience, and if they don't, they get half the experience through the EXP share. Thankfully, the option to turn the EXP share off is there, but judging by Sword and Shield's implementation of it, having the EXP share on is their intended way to play the game. This wouldn't really be an issue if the games were balanced around it. In fact, it would be an excellent overall change. But as we'll see going forward, X and Y were not properly balanced with the new system in mind. Speaking of under-the-hood changes, chances are by now that you'll have encountered a Flabebe, an example of the first new type introduced in almost 15 years. There are a number of changes to the type chart starting in X and Y, including the addition of fairy types, the steel type losing its resistance to ghost and dark moves, and certain types getting unique additional bonuses. Grass types are unaffected by moves like Sleep Powder, electric types can't be paralyzed, poison types will always land the move Toxic, and ghost types can't be trapped and unable to switch. Like Dark and Steel types before them, Fairy types disturbed the type chart a bit and were created specifically to balance the dominating Dragon type and buff the weak Poison type. While I believe the intentions here were good, I don't think the addition of a new type was the best way to go here. The other 17 types are not well balanced by any stretch of the imagination, and though the fairy type gives more of a reason to use poison and steel type moves and stops dragon types from being an unstoppable force, the decision to make bug types worse against it and to give fire types another resistance was unnecessary. Fire types already resist 5 other types, and poor bug types find themselves resisted by 7 common types. Even so, more variety does add to the gameplay, even if it completely fails to address the main problem it sets out to solve. At the end of the route, we run into Sina and Dexio. We'll be seeing them frequently on our journey as well, and they offer to bring us to Sycamore's lab in Lumio City. Then stop us at the gate to give us return and usher us into the city. Lumio City is the biggest city in the franchise, acts as the central hub of Kalos, and is nothing short of a disaster to navigate. Since the original 3DS doesn't have a second analog stick, you have no way to control the camera here. It tries its best to point itself the direction you're trying to move in with the circle pad, but won't recenter itself if you move away from the camera. Cool visual. Atrocious for navigation. If you decide to navigate with the D-pad, you can kind of get the camera to behave, but having to sacrifice the fastest method of movement or waste time going in and out of a building just to get the camera to play along is not something the player should even have to consider. This isn't helped by the fact that practically everywhere in the city seems to be blocked off due to a blackout. When we finally make it into Sycamore's lab after being interrupted twice by Sina and Dexio en route, Sycamore greets us, the friend squad starts to pile in, and Sycamore challenges us to a battle. This instantly makes him one of the most memorable professors in the franchise. Although the battle against his 3 Kanto starters isn't likely to pose a challenge even if you're only using one Pokemon at the moment. For defeating him, he gives you the option to pick one of the 3 Kanto starters. This is a pretty unique event, but having 2 starters which both evolve into powerful Pokemon this early on in the game doesn't help the game's balance problem much if you choose to use them. You're also given the corresponding Megastone to your starter choice, and version-exclusive Megastones are one of a whopping 3 major differences between X and Y. If you choose Charmander, you'll get a Charizardite X or Y depending on your version. Spoilers, the other differences are the usual, different Pokemon of the wild, and different legendary at the climax, so there you go. Megastones pertain to Mega Evolution, Sycamore's area of study, and a mechanic we'll touch on when it gets introduced later in the game. Before leaving the lab, we meet Lysander, who tells us his desire is for a more beautiful world. I'll give you 3 guesses as to who the villain of this story is, and here's a hint, it's not Tierno. On our way out, the friend squad rambles about what they're going to do next, and we're asked to meet with our rival at a cafe nearby before we can head out onto the next route. At the cafe, we see Lysander again talking with Diantha, who is apparently a famous movie star, about the nature of beauty, having a strong disagreement with her thoughts on the matter. Your rival tells you that you're their rival now. Neat? With that out of the way, it's time to head to Route 5 and be promptly interrupted by Tierno calling us over the Holocaster. In Route 5, telling us to go to Route 5, the gate we're directly in front of. In the gatehouse, we're introduced to Mr. Bonding. We'll be seeing this creep a few more times throughout the game, and each time we'll be rewarded with an O-Power. This is an evolution of a mechanic from Generation 5 we couldn't really touch on called Pass Powers. O-Powers provide you and those around you with a temporary benefit, anything from raising your Pokemon stats to increasing the experience gained to making Pokemon easier to catch. It's nice to have them around, and if you don't want to use them, you can feel free to completely ignore them. When you step out onto Route 5, a Lucario will run towards you, followed by its owner, Karina, a gym leader. We'll be seeing her again later. Route 5 is straightforward with a couple alcoves to explore, and it's the first time you can experience a horde encounter, where 5 wild Pokemon appear at once. Admittedly, this doesn't add a whole lot for the casual player since you can still flee from a horde encounter like normal. And to compensate for the number of enemies, their levels are lower than the average wild Pokemon in the area. Hordes will occasionally be joined by a different Pokemon, and rival species will fight each other, but that's about as deep as they get. Shortly into the route, you'll encounter Trevor and Tierno, the latter of whom challenges you to a battle. Tierno has a Corphish, and that's it. It knows Swords Dance and will use it to buff its attack, but at this point it's probably very low level compared to whatever you have. Even the trainer immediately following this battle is more formidable than Tierno. In the next town, the Hollowcaster interrupts us to tell us that it exists and is useful despite all evidence so far pointing towards the contrary. Shauna takes us to an old castle in town to find out if anybody knows something about Mega Evolution, but this lead ends up being a bust. The owner is called out to deal with something, and we have to follow on to Route 7. South of Route 7 is this region's berry field, a large, centralized location to do all your berry planting that fortunately does not require access to a defunct online service. Back on the main path, a Snorlax is blocking the way forward and requires a Pokeflute to wake up. We learn that the man's Pokeflute is on loan to the nearby Parfume Palace, and of course it's up to us to retrieve it. After paying the entrance fee and going inside, we learn the owner's Furfrou has run off and Shauna volunteers us to find it. It's out in the garden, and after another interruption by Shauna, we find it in a small hedge maze. Though this definitely stretches the definition of maze. To catch Furfrou, we have to do a short puzzle to corner it, but puzzle is also a stretch considering the answer is spelled out to you if you screw up even once, and there's only 3 possible places to have Shauna stand. Furfrou rescued, the owner celebrates with a fireworks show in what is supposed to be a touching moment with Shauna. The fireworks show will also awkwardly play out during the day if you really want to ruin the mood. For our troubles, we get the Pokeflute back and can finally move forward. Once the flute gets played and your encounter with Snorlax is over, you're immediately interrupted by the friend squad to get a lesson on how the daycare works. This is a bit annoying, but at least it doesn't take long, and believe it or not, this is only the second time in the series you're forced into a tutorial to learn how the daycare works. While making my way through the route, I happened to get lucky enough to find a shiny Spritzee. This is a good time to bring up the fact that the shiny rate has dropped to 1 in 4096 starting in X and Y. I'm not really sure if this is a positive or negative overall change. You could argue it devalues shiny Pokemon from previous entries, but you could also argue that the various methods of improving shiny odds already did that. You could also argue that it's just a palette swap and would also be correct. Further up the route is the Battle Chateau. This is a place where you could fight random trainers daily for additional experience and cash, even getting the ability to rebattle gym leaders. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of fights with weak trainers to get to that point, and I doubt most players will want to put in the effort this early in the game. And most players will forget about this area entirely by the time they want to rebattle the tougher trainers, leaving them with only the underleveled trainers. Not to mention the fact that rematches with important trainers don't feature the trainer's full roster, only 2 or 3 Pokemon each. Although it's an infinite source of cash and experience, this was definitely better executed in previous games. At the end of the route, we're challenged to a multi-battle by Trevor and Tierno and team up with our rival to do so. Tierno is still as pathetic as ever, and Trevor only has 2 weak Pokemon, making this feel like a waste of time for anyone who already is aware of what a multi-battle is. Up next is a cave that's literally a hallway to the next route, where we're greeted once again by Sina and Dexio, who give us the Coastal Kalos Dex. I'm not really sure why the Kalos Dex was split into 3 parts. I suppose it's easier to figure out where a Pokemon is located, but typically regional Pokédexes are numbered roughly from the beginning of the game to the end of the game to alleviate that issue anyway. I've gotta say, the cliffside on Route 8 is pretty cool. It gives a good sense of height, and the view of the ocean below looks great. Easy to miss on this route is the first instance of a sky battle. These bill themselves as an addition to the formula, but in reality they're a reductive version of single battles. Only certain flying types and certain Pokemon with the ability Levitate can participate, and attacks that logically would not function in the air cannot be used. Aside from these restrictions, they're just single battles with a sky background. There's nothing in particular about Kalos that suggests a connection to the sky, and these are only found on rare occasions throughout the single-player adventure, so I'm not sure why time was spent on developing this mechanic in the first place. At the end of the route, your rival tells us that we can cut through the aquarium to get to the next town where the second gym lies, but should look into the fossil lab first. Unfortunately, we're blocked off from going north if we decide to ignore this, so off to the fossil lab it is. We're told to head to Glittering Cave and seek out their assistant to maybe get answers. The way there is a slog, to say the least. First, there's Route 9, which is only traversable by riding a Rhyhorn very slowly across the rocks, smashing rocks and potentially getting ambushed by wild Pokemon to make the process even more slow and arduous. Glittering Cave itself is better, but it's still an incredibly dull cave. The way further in doesn't require you to turn at all, and there are only 3 branching paths that all lead to a dead end very quickly. In the deepest part of the cave, we have our first encounter with Team Flare, a group that wants to make it so only they can be happy? Yeah, good luck with that one, guys. As usual, these guys aren't a problem to take out, but at least they all use different Pokemon. Once that's done, we find the assistant and learn absolutely nothing. At least we get one of the new fossil Pokemon out of the whole ordeal. Back at the roadblock from earlier, we're given a dowsing machine. Instead of being on the bottom screen, this one is visible in your character's hands and is a bit more cumbersome than the one in Gen 5. Speaking of the bottom screen, it's about time I get around to that, huh? The bottom screen this time around is returned to being useful 100% of the time and has 3 main screens: the player search system, Super Training, and Pokémon.me. Super Training provides a visual indicator of a Pokemon's effort values for the first time in the series, and lets you play a training minigame to boost your EVs. It's a fantastic way to get more casual players into the concept, since it's one of the fundamentals of competitive play, and lucky for experienced players, there are faster ways outside of the minigame to train Pokemon. Pokémon.me is a new feature that introduces a new mechanic known as Affection. Distinct from the hidden happiness stat, Affection is gained by playing with your Pokemon in this mode by interacting with them, feeding them, and playing minigames. Outside of simply being a unique way to bond with your Pokemon like you never could before, you also get bonuses for raising affection levels. Boosted experience, surviving with 1 HP, avoiding attacks, and even doubling the chance of landing a critical hit in battle. These bonuses are nice, especially for novice players, but can very easily break the game in half. Still, the option is there if you really want to. Finally, the player search system, the best online implementation in this series to date. Trades and battles, locally and online, can be conducted anywhere in the game, and various players online will appear as passerby and can request and be requested for trades and battles at any time. On top of that and the usual GTS service, there's now Wonder Trade, which allows you to trade your Pokemon for another random Pokemon from someone else online. Or Battle Spot, where you can participate in ranked battles for the first time in the series. Having all this available at any point without having to visit a specific location is fantastic. It's really a shame we're probably never going to see an online system implemented this well again. Time for the next gym. This one is a rock-type gym themed around rock climbing. It's a pretty cool idea and makes good use of the new camera angles by using the whole 3D space for the navigation puzzle. By this point in the game, due to the long stretch between the first gym and now, you could potentially have any type of Pokemon at your disposal. So how do you balance that? The gym leader, Grant, has the fossil Pokemon at his disposal, which are Rock Ice and Rock Dragon. It's difficult to have a single Pokemon in your party that can cover both of these options, requiring you to use multiple Pokemon in your party effectively, which ends up balancing his party of 2 surprisingly well. For our efforts, we get the Cliff Badge and can proceed to Route 10. Route 10 is very straightforward, barring a small strength puzzle for a TM, but partway through we're stopped by a Team Flare grunt who alludes to an event that happened 3,000 years ago before his inevitable defeat. At Geosenge Town, we see the grunt run off and give chase, to which the grunt taunts us, saying Team Flare will use the stones on Route 10 to further their ultimate goal. Helpfully, our rival shows up to tell us the same thing, along with the obvious fact that we can't follow the grunt. Besides this and a soothing music piece, there's not a lot to Geosenge Town, so it's off to the next route. Before we can leave, Karina appears again and asks us for a battle against her Lucario. Plural. This shouldn't be too difficult, but if you let her fire off too many power-up punches, you might find yourself in trouble. She invites us to face her in the next gym, and after a very short route we're in Reflection Cave. This is a unique cave where there are mirrors on most walls. This makes avoiding trainers difficult, but it's a nice aesthetic and has a few optional perspective puzzles related to the reflections. Tierno also shows up partway through to give us Flash, reminding us that Flash is a move that exists and has even less purpose than ever before. In the next town, the Friend Squad appears again, with Trevor asking to compare how many Pokemon the two of you have seen. Believe it or not, it's possible to lose this competition, but you have to go out of your way to avoid as many trainers and wild encounters as possible. Regardless, nothing comes of it besides being pointed towards the Tower of Mastery, and when you take a few steps forward towards it, Tierno interrupts you to give you a rock. Inside the tower, we meet the Mega Evolution Guru and find out that the rock is actually just a rock and not a Megastone, rendering the whole conversation pointless. Once the Friend Squad has been completely assembled, the Guru explains that Mega Evolution is a step beyond a Pokemon's final evolutionary form and is a temporary transformation. He then tells us that since he only has one Mega Ring to give us, we'll need to sort out who gets it among ourselves. Instead of getting to fight everyone again, Trevor, Tierno, and Shauna drop out, leaving only us and our rival. The fight isn't too difficult. Your rival only has 3 Pokemon, and they're all underleveled compared to where you're likely to be at this point in the game. After winning the privilege of getting the Mega Ring, we have to go through the next gym to prove our worth. This is a fighting type gym, with the challenge being to face most of the trainers here to complete the path in the middle. The battle with Korrina should go fairly smoothly, despite having a Hawlucha that can throw you off with its fighting flying type and a signature move that combines the strengths and weaknesses of both those types. Her first 2 Pokemon pose no real threat unless you purposely let them perform Power-Up Punch multiple times. You'll soon earn the Rumble badge and can ascend the tower, facing Korrina with the Lucario that took a shine to you earlier. This properly introduces the Mega Evolution mechanic. You sacrifice your Pokemon's held item slot to gain the ability to further evolve your Pokemon, giving it a new appearance, 100 additional base stat points, and potentially a different type combination and ability. On paper, Mega Evolution is a great idea. Give it to some Pokemon that have fallen behind over the years due to general power creep happening, or have it as an option to make it more unpredictable what the Pokemon you're facing will end up doing. The problem is that both of these points are undermined by the fact that Pokemon who were already strong, like Scizor and Metagross, also received Mega Evolutions. And in most cases, Mega Evolution is so powerful it becomes the only viable option for all but the Pokemon that were already strong to begin with. Additionally, there usually isn't a reason to not Mega Evolve if you're holding a Megastone. While there are strategic possibilities to be had, they're incredibly uncommon. I like the mechanic overall. It does give a lot of ignored Pokemon a chance to shine, but it's usually not as thought-provoking as it should be, and to make things worse, none of the new Pokemon from Generation 6 get a Mega Evolution besides one of the event Pokemon, contributing to the problem of Gen 6 Pokemon being overshadowed in the generation they debut in. After finishing the battle, we're given the Lucario to keep. This is another good moment to present one of the problems the new experience share creates. The Pidgeotto I've been keeping on my team has only seen a single battle and has managed to reach level 32 between then and now. If a Pokemon I've been keeping in the background passively has been able to reach this level with no battles under its belt, a few Pokemon you've been actively leveling will be much stronger by now with the experience share on. Before leaving the city, our rival stops us to give us Surf. Convenient timing since we need it briefly on the next route to cross the ocean. This route is brief, but there's a Skiddo Ranch where you can ride one around to collect items and even skip a few otherwise mandatory trainer battles. Up ahead, we have the option to surf up to Azure Bay for some optional battles and items and can visit the Sea Spirit's Den, though there's nothing here for us yet. When we arrive in the next city, our rival calls us to ask us for a battle outside the gym, and to get there we have to take the monorail into town. Coincidentally, Sycamore and Diantha are here and discuss the nature of Mega Evolution and bonds between trainer and Pokemon before heading out, and we get the HM for Fly for our trouble. The next rival battle goes about the same as the last one. Same Pokemon, slightly higher level. Though at this point my whole team outlevels all 3 of theirs. The next gym is a grass gym, which is a navigation puzzle centered around climbing around a cylindrical tower and swinging from place to place on your way to Ramos at the top. As I mentioned earlier, the variety of Pokemon you can have at this point in the game also ends up being a bit of a curse, since you almost certainly have at least one Pokemon that can deal with grass types by now. And even if you don't, Ramos really doesn't have any tricks up his sleeve, and chances are you're already stronger than all 3 of his Pokemon already. Especially with Megas on your side should you choose to use them. Plant badge in hand, it's time to head to Route 13. Lysander interrupts us via Holocaster, asking us to use our new abilities to help him create a beautiful world, and following that, Cena and Dexio appear to upgrade our Pokédex again and let us know that the way down to Lumiose is blocked due to trouble at the power plant. Of course, as the protagonist, it's up to us to clean up the mess. Route 13 is very open but straightforward beyond a few small side areas. Wild Pokemon in the area are irritating in that they follow you around, and Repel doesn't work to keep them away. You're likely to get ambushed a few times on your way through with no recourse. This is made especially annoying by the fact that 2 of the 3 Pokemon on the route have Arena Trap, so if you don't have a Ghost or Flying type with you, you're in for even more wasted time. As you'd expect, it's Team Flare who's causing trouble at the power plant, using the same 6 Pokemon families we saw them use back in Glittering Cave, plus Mightyena and Liepard, though that's a bit of a downgrade. Given its intended use as a public works structure, the functional design of the power plant makes sense, even if it's not particularly interesting to traverse as a result. The Team Flare admin and one of their admin scientists? The distinction isn't always clear, but another important member, Aliana, are both ridiculously easy to take down since both of them only have 1 Pokemon and hers is a Mightyena. After trouncing them, 2 people who are totally not Cena and Dexio appear to congratulate us and give us some max revives for doing a good job. Right before the next gate to Lumiose, we see an extremely tall man mumbling about a flower Pokemon given eternal life. Back in Lumiose again, Shauna invites us to see Prism Tower in the center of the city, and we have no choice but to go with her to see it. Fortunately, as it turns out, Prism Tower is the next gym. This is an electric gym, and like Blaine's gym in Gen 1, this is centered around simple quizzes. Unlike in Blaine's gym, you're required to fight against the trainer who corresponds to the answer you picked anyway. I guess an incredibly young or inattentive player might have to face multiple trainers in this gym, but it feels very patronizing for anyone who's been paying any attention. Being an electric gym at least has the advantage of the majority of Pokemon only sharing a weakness to a single type, although ground is a fairly common type and we just came from a desert filled with ground types, which undermines the gym's difficulty a bit. Clement is hardly noteworthy either, unfortunately. Another gym leader past the midway point only carrying 3 Pokemon, none of which cover each other's weaknesses particularly well. The Voltage badge will be yours in no time, and stepping outside we're asked by Sycamore to meet him in Lysander's cafe, where Lysander tells us about how much he hates people who take from others. After that, Trevor tells us the Friend Squad is meeting on Route 14, so unfortunately that will be our next destination as well. Now that we have full access to Lumiose, there's a few more shops we can visit, though a majority of the town contains buildings that are meant more for world building than actually serving a functional purpose. On Route 14, Trevor and your rival are the first to show up. Trevor will compare his Pokédex to yours and almost invariably lose, and your rival is next up to taste defeat. Same team as last time, but their starter has evolved now, meaning that if you chose anything but Greninja, there's now type overlap in their already lacking team. The rest of the Friend Squad piles in afterwards, and it's decided that we're going to a haunted house later up the route, like it or not. The next route is a swamp area that's surprisingly short, though it doesn't feel like that since walking in the swamp slows you down, and occasionally stops you dead in your tracks, all the while you're getting attacked by a wild Pokemon if you aren't using repels. At the end of the route, we're forced into visiting the spooky house with the Friend Squad and listen to a story. This moment probably would have worked better if this wasn't a video game, but having no choice but to get control taken away from you for a pointless excursion is incredibly irritating. The next town holds the 6th gym, and there's Team Flare members blocking the way forward, so progression it is. This gym is a fairy gym styled after a dollhouse, using the warp tile puzzle gimmick from generations past. The gym leader, Valerie, is a prime example of why gym leaders needed Mega Evolutions to keep up. Her first Pokemon is Mawile, one of the Pokemon lucky enough to receive a Mega Evolution, and one of the best ones at that. Unfortunately, without that Mega Evolution, Mawile is really bad on its own, and though Sylveon as her ace is a good choice, you're still in for a very easy fight overall. And that's not helped by the level gap between you and your opponents getting ever wider. Soon enough, we get the Fairy Badge, and the Friend Squad meets us outside and tells us to visit the Pokeball factory with them. Surprise! Team Flare is here to be a nuisance again, and as usual, it's up to us to stop them. Surprisingly though, you don't have to face a single grunt in here if you're careful. A very refreshing change of pace. The factory's president is getting attacked by an admin who's more or less a joke, and our rival shows up to assist us in the battle against the scientists Celosia and Brioni. Frankly, this didn't even need to be a multi-battle considering they only have one Pokemon each. For chasing off Team Flare, we're given the Master Ball and have to deliver the bad news that the factory tour is cancelled, and upon exiting, we're given a news bulletin that the raid on the Pokeball factory won't affect prices. Neat? In any case, that roadblock should be clear, so it's time to move on. Route 15 has a pleasant autumn aesthetic and is the first part of the game where you're really given free rein to explore your surroundings. As usual, there's optional items all about the area and trainers to battle, along with the entrance to a mini-dungeon in the Lost Hotel, and another path onto Route 16, which houses more of the same plus another entrance to the Lost Hotel and a small fishing hole. Lysander interrupts you via Holocaster to tell you about Sycamore's research. This is followed by an encounter with Sycamore himself when you step into Dendemil Town, where he tells you about the cover legendary, Xerneas for X and Yveltal for Y, and how they have power over life and death respectively. After he leaves, Trevor tells us to head to Frost Cavern, and as usual, that's the only way we can go for now. Frost Cavern is another relatively straightforward dungeon filled with, you guessed it, ice tile puzzles. The good news here is that allowing for diagonal movement gives you some more room for creative puzzle solving, even if it's not usually necessary, and there's a few side areas to discover if you're so inclined. Deep into the cave, we find an Abomasnow being tormented by Team Flare, who tells us they've been doing everything so far to ensure only they can survive. Strange, but we've certainly seen stranger motivations. Here we face Mabel. Alright, really? What's with these people and having only a single Pokemon? Especially by this point in the game, any player is bound to have more than one Pokemon on their team. And even if they're only carrying a single Pokemon, the level difference will make the battle trivial either way. With Team Flare ousted, a Mamoswine returns to Route 17 to give us a ride like Rhyhorn back on Route 9. This functions identically to that segment of gameplay. Same movement speed, same breakable rocks, same traversable space where wild Pokemon can attack you at any time. Fortunately, it's shorter and you don't have to go through it twice. Our rival calls us for another battle in front of the next gym, and Cena interrupts us right as we enter town to tell us there's someone with information about the cover legendary in town. How helpful. This town is pretty, if nothing else. The music backing it is great, and the city's sundial landmark is remarkable. It's also the host of one of my favorite small side quests in the series. An old man tells us that his wife has recently passed, and feeling lonely, he'd like a Pokemon to look after that's under level 5. Doing this for him brings him a lot of joy, and although we can reclaim the Pokemon we left him at any time, I'm going to let him hold on to that Pidgey for a little while. As promised, at the gym our rival challenges us once again, and it's the same as usual. At least this time they've added an evolution to their team corresponding to the starter you chose to make things at least a bit more interesting. The next gym is a Psychic-type gym with a unique 3D maze on a globe. It's not terribly complex, but it at least gives you the option to skip gym trainers if you don't want to fight them. A change I'm glad they made after the Generation 5 games forced you to fight everyone in almost every gym. Olympia isn't very noteworthy, which probably explains why I couldn't even remember her name before fighting her. Just 3 Pokemon, all under the level you're likely to be at this point, and even though it could have been more interesting had she used one of the new Gen 6 Psychic types like Delphox or Malamar, that unfortunately isn't the case. We quickly earn the Psychic badge, and our rival tries to challenge us after we exit the gym. But everyone's Holocaster buzzes, and Lysander informs the populace that Team Flare is going to use the ultimate weapon to eliminate all non-members. Of course, we better put a stop to it, and it's suggested we check Lumiose to find him. If you've forgotten where to go by now, these Flare Grunts will helpfully point you in the right direction. At Lysander's cafe, we take out 2 grunts posing as waitstaff to enter Lysander Labs. The man himself confronts us at the entrance and tests our strength. This fight is just a warm-up for the one later on, since 2 of his Pokemon are unevolved. But if you can beat him now, you're probably going to be able to beat him in the future as well. He tells us to get to the basement we have to fight everyone here, and he's not kidding about that. Of all the grunts in here, you can only skip fighting about 2 of them, all the while taking on spin tile and warp tile puzzles a la Team Rocket. We also rematch the scientists while we're in here, who are no more difficult than they previously were despite having 2 Pokemon each. Once we have the key, we go down to find that tall man from earlier has been imprisoned. He tells us the story of the ultimate weapon, designed to give life back to his precious Pokemon who died in the war that was ultimately used to end the war by killing an untold number of Pokemon. The man, who we're told is called AZ, begs us to stop them from using the weapon again. Lysander offers us a chance to stop the ultimate weapon from being fired by fighting Xerosic. Just like the other scientists, he only has 2 Pokemon and thus goes down easily. We're given a choice between a blue button and a red button, but this is pointless. Even if you pick correctly, the weapon gets activated anyway, and we're shown its activation in Geosenge Town. It's time to return to the area the grunt from way back when retreated into, and our rival accompanies us to stop Lysander's ambitions. Lysander apologizes for activating the weapon anyway, and elaborates a bit on why he plans to kill everyone, lamenting that he'll be killing innocent Pokemon in the process. He challenges us again, but despite his Mienshao and Honchkrow being evolved, it'll go about the same as last time. From here, it's essentially a straight shot to the end with a few grunts blocking the way. Shauna shows up partway through to do what she can, and uses a puzzle box to unlock the door. 4 admin roadblocks later, and the cover legendary springs out of their cocoon, challenging us to a battle. We're forced to catch it and stop it from being used to power the weapon, but we aren't forced to use it afterwards. Enraged, Lysander challenges us to reclaim it with the same team he's been using. The only difference now is that he's the first boss to use Mega Evolution against us. His Gyarados can be surprisingly threatening as a result, but since his other Pokemon are still weaker than what you're likely to be, what should be a climactic showdown is more likely to end on a whimper than a bang. Lysander decides to fire the weapon with what energy it had left in an attempt to kill everyone in the room, but fails, only succeeding in destroying the weapon and turning the base to rubble. The friend squad goes their separate ways again, AZ shows up to repeat himself again, and the evil team plot reaches its conclusion. This was a stronger plot than I remember it being. The goal of using the ultimate weapon is actually foreshadowed at multiple points, but Lysander's reasoning is still incredibly stupid even in the context of the story. Kids will find Lysander's plan ridiculous because who would want to destroy a world with Pokemon in it? And anyone older will find it ridiculous because of the nature of the Pokemon world in comparison to ours. The strife and wars Lysander preaches about are not readily evident in any glimpse into the present-day Pokemon world we can see. And although there are still bad actors in the Pokemon world, it's almost utopian overall. So, to put it another way, who would want to destroy a world with Pokemon in it? Well, now that Team Flare has been stopped, we can get back on track. Sycamore asks us to meet him in the next town, and we head through Route 18. Here we can find the house of a man who introduces a new style of battle, Inverse Battles. As the name implies, Inverse Battles flip the type chart. Anything not very effective or ineffective becomes super effective, and vice versa. The only condition is that abilities still apply, so Levitate, for instance, still gives the bearer a ground immunity. Unlike Sky Battles, this actually does challenge you to think about battles in a different way, which makes it more of a shame that this is the only place in the game where you can have these battles against one trainer with 3 Pokemon once per day. You can't even challenge your friends with inverse rules. Next to his house is Terminus Cave, an optional dungeon that has plenty of trainers to fight and items to collect, and is certainly the most complex cave in the game. I don't understand why the reward, the ability to capture Zygarde, was withheld from the player, since in previous games a powerful legendary served as a reward for going out of your way to explore. Soon enough, we'll be in the next town where Sycamore meets us and apologizes for Lysander turning out the way he did before challenging us to a battle. It's nice that it comes full circle here, with his fully evolved party of Kanto starters, but as you'd expect, you definitely have the tools to take him down easily by now. Not much else to do here but move on to Route 19, where the Friend Squad appears one last time, challenging us to a battle for the first time in ages. First up is Shauna. Despite having this game's pseudo-legendary, she is no trouble to take down. Next up is Tierno, and he's marginally better than last time. Unfortunately, marginally better than abysmal is still very close to abysmal. Finally, Trevor heals our team before challenging us, and surprisingly enough, he's the most formidable of the three. Though that doesn't really mean much either. Once that's over, the Friend Squad disbands, Shauna reminisces about her journey and gives us Waterfall before taking off. Thankfully, this is the last time we have to see the Friend Squad. When we reach Snowbell City, we find the gym leader is absent, gone off to Winding Wood, the next dungeon which is brief but maze-like and leads to Pokemon Village. Wulfric apologizes for keeping us waiting and returns to the gym. This one's an Ice-type gym with a puzzle revolving around switches that rotate floors nearby, tasking you with matching up paths to find the way forward. Wulfric claims this will be either the easiest gym for you or the toughest one, but it's difficult to see this being the toughest one for most players, which isn't so much his fault as it is the fault of the Ice type. The fact is, Ice simply isn't a good type for a gym at all. Put it too early in the game and new players, especially those who picked a Grass type starter, will get pulverized due to the overwhelming offensive potency of Ice types. Put it too late in the game and the player will have plenty of options to deal with the Ice type's terrible defensive matchups. Even if he had more than 3 Pokemon, Wulfric would still relinquish the Iceberg badge quickly. And after a quick run through either Route 21 or 22, we're on our way to Victory Road. This game's Victory Road is one of the more straightforward ones we've seen so far, with little emphasis on puzzle solving or traversal skill. Although thankfully there are still plenty of opportunities to go off the beaten path and get rewarded for your efforts. Halfway through, we also get challenged by our rival one last time. They've added an Altaria to their team, but they're still underleveled relative to where you're likely to be at this point, making for an underwhelming final battle. Don't feel too bad, Calum or Serena. Brendan and May still hold the coveted title of Worst Rival. We are finally at the Pokemon League once again, ready to challenge the Elite Four. At the entrance, we're greeted by Malva, who is none too happy about us stopping Team Flare's ambitions. You might recognize her from that Holocast clip about the Pokeball Factory way back when, but I wouldn't be shocked if you didn't. Malva's pretty hot. She specializes in fire types and is accompanied by water, dragon, and steel type specialists as well, using the same format as in Gen 5. Unfortunately, she's not much of a threat, though that's more due to the level difference here, since your Pokemon are likely to be about 5 levels higher than any of the Elite Fours. The only member who gave me any trouble was Wilkstrom, but that was more due to the innate strength of the steel type and my own stupidity than anything else. If you got this far, the Elite Four will be a piece of cake, leaving the champion, Diantha. As a character, she's probably the weakest champion in the whole series. Every other champion has helped the player out during the main storyline or has been present in some way throughout the player's adventure, but Diantha only appears twice and isn't the main focus of either scene. She's always with another character, and the player never encounters her alone. Thankfully, she isn't the worst champion in terms of her team, though she's not one of the best. Her team has major weaknesses to Ice, Steel, and Fairy types, and that Steel weakness is a death sentence considering her ace, the Pokemon she megas, is Gardevoir. By now you have so many options to deal with her and are still likely to be a few levels ahead. Becoming the champion and entering the Hall of Fame becomes an inevitability. Sycamore hosts an award ceremony for you and the Friend Squad for saving Kalos from Team Flare. Finally being recognized for saving the world is admittedly long overdue, and before this playthrough I would have griped about the entire Friend Squad getting awarded for this, but admittedly everyone did something during the crisis, even if we were only informed about it later down the line. AZ appears and challenges us to a battle. This is thematically a very cool battle, since all of AZ's Pokemon could be as old as he is, but it's purposefully designed to be more for show than anything. Win or lose, the outcome is identical. He thanks you for the battle and repents for his misdeeds, and the Pokemon he gave eternal life finally returns to him. It's a fairly touching scene, and if anything, the emotional payoff definitely feels more earned than the fireworks scene with Shauna way back when. With that, the credits roll, and you know what that means by now, it's time for the postgame. Of course, there's the usual Pokédex to complete, the Battle Chateau, and the returning Battle Institute, but there's a few other things to take care of as well. Sycamore tells us to meet him at the train station, where we're given the National Dex and a pass to Kyolude City. the only post-game area, and unfortunately one that doesn't have much to do. There's the Friends Safari, but it doesn't function like the Safari Zone, and the encounters are randomly decided based on your 3DS friends' friend codes. At least it could potentially introduce you to new Pokemon. There's the Battle Maison, this game's battle tower equivalent, which now hosts triple and rotation battles and is more lenient in its rules, allowing you to pause your challenge after any battle. Your rival will rematch you here, with a full team sporting a Mega Absol that's not much harder to take down than Diantha, but at least they tried. There's also the Poke Radar returning from Gen 4 and working in the same way, and a side quest allowing you to collect new Megastones throughout the region, but only from 8 PM to 9 PM. There's also the NPC we gave that Pidgey to earlier. His time has finally come, and he's left us a letter thanking us for our kindness and being able to spend his last days with the Pidgey. This is one of my favorite side quests, not because of the reward given at the end, but because it allows you to see how Pokemon enrich the lives of people as companions. Something that doesn't get touched on very frequently throughout the series outside of the World of Pokemon intro every game has. Back on track, there's also 3 legendaries you can catch. One of the legendary birds will roam the region and eventually becomes catchable in the Sea Spirit's Den. We can finally catch Zygarde. And Mewtwo is available at the Unknown Dungeon in Pokemon Village. Finally, there's a post-game story segment to complete once again. This one revolves around Looker, running a detective agency, and a girl named Emma, following the relationship between the 2 characters and the remnants of Team Flare. It's a nice, self-contained storyline that's reasonably varied, having you go to various locations throughout the city and battling various trainers. But it only clocks in at about an hour or 2, so it won't last for very long. With all that out of the way, what are my overall thoughts on X and Y? After all my gripes throughout the video, would you have guessed I'm actually more positive on these games than I was going into it? That said, more positive doesn't mean positive overall. Before I get to my major issues with the game, I'll go over what the game does well. First and foremost, for the first time Game Freak made a 3D game, it's very visually appealing. Many areas throughout the game stand out visually, and full character models look fantastic. Aside from the battle themes you hear most often, the soundtrack is as fantastic as ever. The colossal Pokédex size is also excellent, allowing for incredibly diverse team building, and as I've said before, X and Y feature the best online system in the entire series. Unfortunately, that's about where my praise ends. Despite being appealing visually, Kalos is very lacking as a region. It's very small and much more linear than its predecessors, with less optional areas to explore than previous regions. The things it shares in common with Kanto, like the Viridian Forest layout and the Snorlax blocking the path at the start of the game, also take away from Kalos as its own region. As does the wild mishmash of geology that makes the region feel less coherent. Hidden items are also a bit strange and often seem misplaced, still giving you items like regular Pokeballs and Paralyze Heals very late into the game, which, on top of the Dowsing Machine being harder to use and areas that could have made for great secret places like Pokemon Village being forced onto the player, makes exploration less rewarding. Not that you're really given a chance to explore for the most part anyway, you're interrupted so frequently throughout your journey by so many things. Be it the Friend Squad, the Holocaster, or other NPCs, and the game rarely gives you a chance to figure things out on your own. Speaking of the Friend Squad, they're awful. Time can't realistically be dedicated to fleshing out all of them, so instead we end up with 4 one-note characters that can't even provide you a challenge in battle. Balance is also another area the game struggles with. The experience share is utterly broken. The absolute worst case scenario for the mechanic. And although thankfully you do have the option to turn it off, this clearly isn't what Game Freak wants you to do. Even with the experience share off though, every gym in the game is a joke since they all have a maximum of 3 Pokemon and don't actively consider what Pokemon would work well to cover the general weaknesses of their primary type. The player is also only forced to interact with Mega Evolution a grand total of 3 times during the main story, and one of those times is just a tutorial for the mechanic. One of the main appeals of Pokemon to many people is the flexibility it gives you in terms of team composition. The variety the Kalos Dex provides you is fantastic, and I will never argue in favor of smaller Pokédex sizes. but the Pokédex has to be used as a tool for both the player and the developers. X and Y is a worst-case scenario in which there are so many things in place that could have led to an excellent game overall, but so many things bog it down between a severely lowered difficulty, constant interruptions for a mediocre plot and terrible rivals, and a region that looks pretty but manages to feel smaller with less content than any region that's come before it. Unfortunately, X and Y never got the third version they needed to potentially become great games. After all, Platinum is undeniably one of the best entries in the series, and it was made with the mediocre Diamond and Pearl as a base. But a third version won't always make a Pokemon game better than the games it's based on, and in the next video we'll dive into just why that is. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and or comment down below, and if you want to see more of these long-form analysis videos in the future, please consider subscribing. Until next time, I'm Forma, and those are my thoughts.